But yeah, thank you so much for coming out, Lydia. I appreciate you taking the time to kind of share some of your experiences. And I'd love to kind of get started and get like a little bit of background because you made a huge leap, right? 3,000 miles, give or take, that you moved to New York. So what kind of led you to New York investing?
Great question. I think I always pictured myself living in a big city. I've always had my hand in real estate and been interested in real estate. And so New York seemed like it had the most interesting real estate opportunities. I ended up acquiring this business from previous ownership, the property management business. And so basically, I was able to find an amazing business that somebody was ready to transition out of in a city with really interesting and I think prevalent real estate opportunities in an environment that I personally felt comfortable with because I was born and raised in Seattle, moved to LA, spent time in San Francisco. So the fact that, New York is tenant friendly, wasn't necessarily something that scared me.
Wow. And it's interesting because most people who relocate to buy real estate or invest in real estate, they're leaving these big cities to go to a smaller town, to suburbs, to more like rural areas. Um, but you kind of did something that's not very common. Like you went from a big city to another big city, and you're not intimidated. It seems like because of the experiences you've had. Did anybody try to talk you out of it? Did anybody say like you're making a mistake? Don't go to a big city.
People have tried to talk me into out of state investing
Yeah.
more so than they've tried to talk me out of New York. I think everybody knows that there is more real estate opportunity in New York City probably than anywhere else in the country, if you are willing to educate yourself and play the game. Um, and I think San Francisco and New York have a mutual respect for each other. Certainly, cost of living is similar. And so I can say nobody tried to talk me out of moving to New York. I can say people did try and talk me out of buying a multifamily property in New York.
What did they try to talk you into? Was it like a condo or something like that?
Absolutely. And I think just the economics didn't make sense for me and my husband. I think with interest rates being what they were, and I think we purchased a condo in San Francisco and we didn't see it appreciate rapidly because it was already a beautiful condo in a nice neighborhood and priced at the top of the market, and so we wanted to try something new, and fortunately, it was successful.
Great, great. And yeah, we'll get into the property management side as well, but I am curious, the condo in San Francisco, were you guys like self-managing at that point or did you hire management?
Great question. We did not hire management. We were fortunate enough to rent to close friends, and so that was we hit the easy button, so to
Okay.
speak, right? Um, and they have been an absolute dream.
Wow. So
Yeah.
so you had, I mean, to hear that, right? Like when you hear about somebody's tenure, let's say in real estate investing, inevitably there's a situation where horrible tenant situation or deferred maintenance that was uncovered and things like that. Being that you had like this really smooth process, you rented to people that you knew and it was fairly easy for you to like manage it yourself. What stopped you from kind of rinsing and repeating in New York and like buying another condo here and renting to somebody maybe that you know?
We are not still not cash flowing on that condo. And we probably won't for another it could be 10 years, right? I think, San Francisco is a little bit more sensitive to the ebbs and flows of a particular industry, tech, than New York, which has finance and real estate and, healthcare. It has so much in abundance. It's a more balanced economy, and so, basically, we wanted something that would cash flow sooner. Uh, we were also more flexible about where we lived. I think we deprioritized having a very, very short commute in order to find something that would cash flow pretty much from jump.
Wow. Okay. So just the idea of finding something that would cash flow relatively quickly, that was enough to kind of steer you away from like this relatively smooth process so far when it came to managing the condo in California. Like, all right, let's dive into multifamily. This is something that we can find that will actually cash flow, which is hard in this market. I think kudos to you and your husband for having that patience because
I was like cash flow minus the 20% down payment, right?
right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. So with that being said, right, like if you're setting out to cash flow in a competitive market like New York, it can be disappointing and things like that. Were there any, just because they're properties that might make sense on paper, but then you check them out, maybe you identify everything that actually needs to be done to maximize rental income, and now the deal doesn't make sense anymore, right? So, were there any points in that search for the multifamily property in New York where it just kind of felt like discouraging or encouraging?
I just love learning about real estate. That will never uh not fascinate me. And so like our first conversation, something that really allowed me to trust you was we were looking at I think it was a converted Victorian in Greenpoint that had, I think it was 4 units or something. And the financials on paper looked amazing. And you warned me about the deferred maintenance on many of these properties. And right away, I understood there are Victorians in San Francisco famously, there are Victorians in, Seattle, and so I loved the opportunity to be educated, and so even when it was sure, it was disappointing, we ended up buying something with a very, very slightly lower cap rate, um, it was a great learning opportunity for me, so I really wouldn't say I was disappointed. I think everything was a learning opportunity that, has proven to be, like, readily applicable very quickly.
Wow, and I think that's a great message too, right? To not get too emotionally involved and remember, like, this is an investment, this is a
Yes.
business, right? So we shouldn't like be swayed too much by the experience of like finding or not finding the right property immediately. We should more so like embrace the educational piece of it, right? Just embrace the idea that hey, every single day, as long as I'm putting time and effort into this process, I'm going to learn something, and that education can be applied now or it can be applied in the future. So that's awesome. And yeah, I mean, what were like some of the things that you weren't expecting, kind of getting into the multifamily space, or
Oof. I mean, I will talk about the beginning before we purchased to the middle, and then now that we're sort of out of the woods. Um, the first thing was I was not expecting, I mean, I think we put in at least one offer where the owner just decided not to sell. And so that doesn't really happen that much in San Francisco. And so I was again, a data point was that people don't want to let go of these things unless they can get top dollar for them. And, not surprisingly, it was a Ridgewood condo in great or Ridgewood apartment building in great condition that was collecting rents that were very close to the top of the market. And so it didn't surprise me that the owner wanted to hang on to it. And so that was a great data point. Um, when we finally did close, we ended up closing on a three-family in Astoria. Um, basically, we knew there was one tenant that we would need to evict, and in closing and talking to different attorneys about the process, we learned it was gonna be just all different that, like, what happens if you need to, evict someone and they need to, enter into essentially, like, social services. How long does that take? How long does it take someone who doesn't need social services? How long does it take somebody in a true free market building? How long does it take somebody if you own less than 10 properties in San Francisco or in New York and you're considered a small landlord? Um, so again, learning curve there. And then now that we're on the other side of it, I think just the day to day building relationships with tenants, improving the property has been uh, frankly a joy. But I'm very much into like I love a fixer upper.
yeah, yeah, you love a project.
I love a
Yeah,
project. Yeah, yeah, it's very
yeah.
gratifying.
That's cool, and I feel like that's so valuable to the audience, right? To understand that it's not black and white. It's not like a cookie cutter process when it comes to evicting a tenant or going to Supreme Court or anything.
Absolutely not. I really wanna emphasize this. I think, oftentimes I would like to speak a little bit about this because it's such a huge part of what we do in property management. Not that we do it frequently, but that it, you know, when it happens, it's something we take seriously. It's I guess, a huge part of our skill set. Um, I think a lot of these horror stories that I have looked into about, "Oh, this person couldn't evict a tenant in 2 years." Um, when I look into them, I think it is challenging because while you are evicting a tenant, in most cases, but not all cases, you cannot collect rent during that time. And so often what we see is landlords who collect rent for a couple months and then the process starts all over. And so I think nobody in real estate is going to tell you capital reserves aren't important, but being able to do the process the way it was designed has certainly got it. Again, it helped everything move on time and on track. And now that I'm educated, I can kind of see through a lot of the hyperbole that is in the space.
Got it. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So if I'm understanding correctly, it is not advantageous for a landlord going through the eviction process to start collecting rent from that tenant. It actually kind of like resets the clock in a way.
Almost always, unless the government is paying that person's rent, right? In which case that you can do it sometimes, most of the time. Um, but yeah, you really have to follow a process. I recommend anyone going through it, hire a professional and listen to instructions. And if you do that, there are there is recourse for landlords, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's huge because you know, just in that, I mean, you're warning landlords, one, hire a professional, get really good advice from somebody who knows what they're doing, has experience in landlord tenant cases, follow their advice because I think it's one thing to get advice. The other thing is to actually follow it. Don't collect those rent checks. You know, just don't deposit them because it'll
Yeah.
reset that clock. For anybody who is maybe worried about potentially getting into an eviction case with an inherited tenant um, or it's they're currently in a situation like this, is there any other like piece of advice that you would share with them?
I would say, I mean, we were afraid of the legal fees. That was not actually the case. There are people who will do evictions competently in New York for $900. Um, so it is not the legal fees that will get you. It is the gap in rent collection, right? For the most part. And so again, like just be prepared to have 6 to 9 months of capital reserves, assuming you are a small landlord and this is a free market building. Again, it does take much, much longer in other situations. Um, so that you can comfortably cover your costs, your mortgage, the maintenance, the insurance, while you are going through the process.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. I mean, when I feel like it's easy to look at a deal emotionally and say, "Oh, this is going to be an amazing deal," but leave out vacancy, leave out maintenance, leave out capital expenditures, leave out reserves, like you mentioned. So that's a huge tip right there. Just make sure
Yes,
your
it's not
accounts are.
glamorous, but yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the
don't go to
boring
the top of
side.
your budget.
Yeah, yeah, and it's cool too because like the more you do this in your underwriting of a deal, the more you'll be able to like call BS on an advertisement that says, "Hey, this deal will cash flow X amount."
Yeah,
You start to break it down. You start to look into what the actual expenses are, what the actual rents are, and account for all of these things that you just mentioned. It won't cash flow that much. So
correct.
that's huge. That's huge. And then you mentioned that evictions aren't like the bulk of what you do and thankfully because of your company this is not something that happens all that frequently. Moving away from evictions, what are some things that you think landlords easily overlook or most commonly overlook when it comes to property management?
That is a good question. I would say, I mean, my worst enemy is water. It sounds so simple and, people kind of bucket it under maintenance, but we live in an aquatic zone here. There is rain, there is snow, there are hurricanes. Um, and so the worst damage I have seen on buildings is water related, especially these older buildings. And it is painful to open up a wall and dry it out, but I really encourage everyone to have at least several months of rent in a reserve to address it. I think, yeah, I would honestly rather deal with a fire than I would with water because just of the impact it has on these properties. Um, I think that is huge. I think vetting potential tenants is something that requires nuance and we take it very, very seriously, which is why our eviction rate is so low. And then I also think, taking time to educate yourself about what are your rights as a landlord and what are their rights as a tenant. In New York City, the government releases the ABCs of housing for a reason, um, but also taking time to comply with the building inspection requirements that exist here. And again, those are things that often go overlooked and are considered unimportant until, something goes wrong and there's a disgruntled tenant, right?
Yeah. No, I love that. I kind of want to unpack it and go back a little bit because I feel like there were a couple of things that are huge to dive into. One being water, right? Like one thing I hear all the time is that water has to find a place to go. Water is not
Yes.
just gonna evaporate on its own, and once it's in the property, it will find some place, and wherever it ultimately sits, it's going to impact that place, right? Whether it's
Yes.
brick or drywall or flooring. Um, is there anything that you guys do or anything that you guys recommend for, let's say, like regular maintenance or just regularly looking into potential water issues?
I think especially for out of state landlords, even hiring somebody who can do regular inspections on the property once a year will save you so much because they will start to see settling. They will start to see, uh, frankly, signs of water damage that you might have overlooked. And then, don't be afraid, or I should say, be prepared to bite the bullet and get it fixed. Because again, we've taken over properties that were either self managed or managed by other companies. And the first conversation that we have to have is there's significant water damage. It's going to be, you know, $25,000 to fix it. Let's talk about how we
Oh
can get
boy.
that done. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's rough. And I mean, in order to do that, we talked about evictions, right? And maybe some tenants are a little bit difficult, but they don't need to be evicted. Maybe they're complying with the house rules, they're paying their rent. How do you set an expectation with tenants to let them know, hey, I'm going to be proactive. I want to look into these issues once a year. Is that something that's required on the lease? It's something that we've put into like lease riders in the past, but I'm just curious if you have any like input on how landlords can kind of prep tenants for this.
Yeah, two things. One is definitely put it in the lease. I always recommend people give themselves the ability to do inspections quarterly. And there are a number of tech tools that allow you to do virtual inspections. So you're not always getting out there. You're not going to see probably the subtlest water damage there, but it will set a precedent with the tenant that you are checking in. So they'll ultimately keep better care of the place. I think observation changes the outcome in many situations. But the second thing is I'm so sorry I lost it here, you're gonna have to edit this out. The second thing is texting tenants once a month. Is there anything going on? It is sometimes frustrating, and this is why I recommend hiring a professional to manage the property because you'll hear the upstairs tenant's child was playing basketball or whatever. You'll hear a lot of stuff that isn't within your scope of power to control.
Mhm.
You will also hear things like, "Oh, yeah, I've just noticed that, like, none of the ceiling fans are working the same way anymore," and it could point to a larger electrical issue.
Wow. Okay. So this is like such a small step that I mean, especially with iPhone, right? You can like schedule these texts for
Yes.
once a month. Hey, is everything working okay? Um, and to your point, like you might have to sift through certain things that really aren't the biggest deal. I'm curious though. Let's just say, for example, uh, you know, somebody's managing a property. You have a tenant upstairs who has a kid that's playing basketball or whatever the case is. Is there a way to handle that without creating friction between those tenants?
Probably not any friction between the tenants, and a lot of things, especially related to noise in New York City, come down to reasonableness,
Mhm.
right? So, you can't call 311 on your neighbor because the dog barked once at 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, creating documentation is gonna help you have the conversation with the person who's responsible for it, and it's gonna help you reset expectations with, the person who's complaining because when you start requiring people document it, suddenly you realize it's just gets them into the mind of a third party person.
Mm,
It's like, okay, I guess the basketball only happened once. Was it at an inopportune time? Yes.
yeah.
Is it happening so much it would push the standard of reasonableness? No.
Oh, wow. Okay, and this is helpful too because by building up like that paper trail, you're able to show like both parties. It's no longer like a he said she said thing, even though it technically is. But at least you can kind of document the day and time of occurrence, the frequency, and then now one of many things can happen, right? Like both of the tenants realize this is or is not reasonable. Some of the tenants might just realize, hey, this was just unfortunately at the wrong time. Maybe I was, on a conference call for work, and this basketball was like just so happened to be like making noise at 1:30 p.m. or whatever the case is, right? So,
Yes.
does in those situations, I'd imagine like text message is that would constitute something in writing,
I
email.
mean, we all have
Does it
cameras on
suffice?
our phones. I always encourage people if it's noise, record it. Um, if it is otherwise disruption, use your phone, use your phone and send me the footage.
Yeah.
And I think that clears up 90% of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, good point. Good point. You also talked about tenant screening and just how important that is. Um, I'd imagine that by doing this the right way, you're probably alleviating, half of the problems, more than that, maybe, right? What are like some of the things that you guys look for, some of the things that you would recommend to somebody going through the tenant screening process?
Yeah, I think this is where fair housing becomes like really educating yourself on fair housing. Even asking somebody, "What's your job?" is illegal, right? It's source of income here in New York,
Mm,
and you can't discriminate based on source of income. And so, it is essential that you educate yourself on fair housing, and that within that scope, you take advantage of the screening that's available to you, right? Um, for instance, I always think about it holistically, right? So credit is a part of it, but it is not a reason we disqualify anyone. Um, Having a record of evictions is not automatically disqualifying in New York, but it's good to factor it in.
mhm,
Um, I think one of the biggest things is when we start talking about references, and we do that with every new tenant, right? What does that conversation look like? I've talked to people who have lived in New York their entire lives, are in their 40s, and have no references.
hmm. Red flag?
Or yeah, a little
Mm,
bit, or they'll ask the first question they'll ask is having references a requirement, right? Does the landlord live on the building, right? And so listening to people's questions, um, and having a little bit of experience about what those questions can indicate is very, very revealing.
got it. So it's not just so much what their responses are to your questions, it's also what they want to know, right? Like, hey, is the
Yes.
landlord strict? Do they live on the premises? Or, what are
Yes.
the requirements to get in? Or if they have a specific question about that, like, do I need to prove that I've lived somewhere in the past? Do I need a reference? Yeah, I mean, if somebody's in their 40s, that can definitely be a red flag. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like, I know you have a long history of renting, and the
Yeah.
fact that you just cannot possibly put me in touch with any single person, or you become very reticent when we talk about that, is a red flag.
Mm,
Um, and then I think the last thing is, with tenant screening is consistency, right?
mm,
We have had a lot of, uh, people put down different answers to what their annual income is versus their monthly income,
mm.
and then that, number changes when they're finally on the application, right? And so being consistent will get you farther than any sort of one smoking gun,
Mhm.
which might not even might not even give you a fair idea of someone, right? And one last thing is with the references thing, I think a lot of people don't do that because they assume, oh, I'll end up calling somebody's friend who's going to pretend to be the landlord. There are ways to verify that. Ownership of properties is in many uh, through many channels public.
Mhm.
Um, so with a little ingenuity, you can ask very specific and pointed questions that only the real owner of that building would know. I mean, Google can give you a lot of
Yeah.
um, can give you a lot of resources.
Yeah. I think doing that research up front will give you more information about the property itself. Maybe more information. I mean, we have LinkedIn, we have Facebook. Sometimes people have public profiles, and you might be able to find
Yeah,
people before you even speak with them. And if somebody's pretending to be this person, they can expose themselves in a number of different ways, just based on the questions that you're asking.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so we were talking about some of the things that we can ask, right? Or some of the things that we can ask. So we can ask, what's your source of income?
Yes.
Are we allowed to ask, let's say, how many people are going to live on the premises? What's their age? Things like that. Maybe not the age, I'm guessing, but what can we ask that are some things that we should be asking?
Great question. So in New York, again, it's all kind of has to be viewed within a spectrum, right? Which is if there is, say, a single parent who moves into a unit and then their partner, they meet somebody, new partner. Generally speaking, it is not something that you can just blanket say, no, your boyfriend or your fiance cannot move in with you, but you can get their name. And from there, you can run a background check. Again, there are rules even in New York State about certain types of offenders living next to schools. Is that your are you required to do that as a landlord? No. Is that something we do as a manager of properties? Certainly. Um, and so I think again, I come back to educating yourself. And a lot of tenants will say, you can't ask who they are. You absolutely can, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't mean that you can just tell them to leave,
Hmm.
right? And I also invite landlords to look at this from the point of view of a tenant, right? If they are paying the rent, if they are otherwise good tenants, is it fair that their relative or a loved one or a potential partner cannot share their space just because you know somebody says so? Um, and so I really encourage people to look at it from both sides, and then to set strong boundaries, educate themselves, and come prepared.
It's a good point because I mean, you can sign a lease, and that lease doesn't dictate when you might fall in love or like
Yes.
when you might move in with your partner or anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. My wife had no idea I was gonna propose to her, and she had just signed the lease for an apartment. I just like moved in with her,
Yep.
and now that we're having this conversation, I'm like, yeah, it makes
Yeah.
total sense. There was no like real issue there, but from the landlord's end, but to your point, we do need to be able to kind of like look at it from that side as well. Like
Yes.
as landlords, property managers, investors, I think the easy thing to think of is here's another person living in the property. In New York, oftentimes the landlords are paying water, right? So now there's more water usage. Now my expenses are going up. So the thought might initially be like, I need this person out, or
Yes.
whatever the case is. So that's really helpful to hear. Thank you.
I think the other thing is like animals. That comes up even more than people, right?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of protections given to emotional support animals. That does not mean that you can have an animal without a rabies or a dog without a rabies vaccine on your property. It does not mean they don't have to provide proof of vaccination. Like there are lots and lots of protections that you
Yeah.
as a landlord have to make sure that that animal is not going to harm anyone else. It's not going to cause a lawsuit. It's not going to damage the property, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, good point. And I'd invite anybody to reach out, and we'll put your information as well, just so people can reach out and ask these questions, right? I feel
Yes.
like there's so many different like variables to take into account. Whether or not the tenant has a particular like mental health status, if the tenant is, elderly, or if the tenant is, let's say is a parent of young children, right? These are things that a judge, right, in the county can look at these things and say, hey, I'm if there was a potential eviction case, they're going to look at things differently, right, based on these factors. So I think it's really important for New York landlords to be in touch with someone like you to kind of understand what they're getting into, right? Of course, in addition to that, a real estate attorney and things like that. Um, you brought up the importance of landlords knowing what they're allowed to do or not do. knowing like their rights as landlords, right? I feel like in New York, uh, like when we think about anybody's rights, we're usually thinking about the tenants' rights, right? And the tenants, we hear that term like professional tenants, right?
Yes.
Tenants who kind of like, well, what is that? I mean, for anybody who's not familiar,
Um,
what do you think
I'm
it
gonna
is?
get a little bit on my soapbox here. I think the term professional tenant is often deployed unfairly. I think that there are absolutely, just as there are bad tenants, there are bad landlords. And so I think just the same way slumlord is something that's hurled around,
Mhm.
professional tenant, it basically means somebody who exploits every angle in the system to avoid paying rent. Um, and it is highly, highly litigious, right? That's the stereotype of the professional tenant. That being said, I think there are certain people who are renters and have um, expectations or needs that a particular landlord is not equipped to meet, and they might not be a good fit for that particular property.
Mm, makes sense. Makes sense. And for let's say for a landlord trying to figure out like what their responsibilities are, right? Sometimes, for example, where there's a multifamily property we're selling,
Yes.
previous owner never filed for like he filed with DOB or HPD that they have to get like rental permits and things like that. Are there any things or any resources that you can think of that would be helpful for landlords to like dive into?
I will, this is the one time I will, be a little bit critical of the New York City,
Please do it.
housing
It's
department
okay.
is that it is a little bit opaque, all of the requirements that you need. I would actually, this is, might not be possible for certain people, but, the Department of Housing Preservation, does live events every once in a while, I think, like, once a quarter. I would seek those out because you can go to the Department of Sanitation, you can go to the Department of Housing Preservation, there'll be somebody from HUD, and you can get, printed materials on all of the requirements that you need to be compliant as a landlord, which is how I found out about things like parapet inspection requirements, right? We don't want, um, you know, decaying buildings to, lead to, like, a brick falling on somebody. Um and so there is unfortunately, there are certain, web pages that will get you started, and I encourage everyone to, seek those out with the Housing Preservation, and Development, department. Um, but unfortunately, there is no, like, there's the ABCs of, uh, tenants or the ABCs of renting. I wish they had an ABCs of being a landlord.
Yeah, yeah. So it seems like there's some helpful information to get landlords started as far as like figuring out, what they need to put in place. I mean, at the end of the day, you're offering a product, right? This is a product to the general public, which is housing, which is probably the most important thing when anybody is deciding where to live, who to vote for, even, right? Like
Yes.
housing
Yeah.
is like always such a big part of like these national debates and things like that, and local debates. So it's super helpful to hear like, hey, there are resources out there, but you might have to like really go down the rabbit hole and figure everything out, or figure some things out for yourself. Ask questions, like you mentioned. HPD has these. They have these events, right?
Yes.
So you can go to those. I think real estate meetups are really important too because
Absolutely.
you're able to like connect with other people who have already gone through some of the things that you're probably experiencing now or about to experience.
Yes.
So this is super helpful. Um, just a couple of like last questions I have for you are related to screening property management companies, right? We talked about screening tenants and some things that you want to ask and look out for. And I feel like when we're talking about screening for landlords, that's like what we always talk about. We're always
Yes.
talking about screening for tenants, but let's face it, if somebody is looking to scale rental property portfolio long term, they can't do it all themselves. They need management to some degree, right? Um, or maybe they need management completely because they just don't have the bandwidth to do all of this themselves. Um, what are some things that people should look out for when they're screening a property management company, or some questions they should ask?
Great question. Bigger Pockets is a phenomenal resource. I think it's 50 questions to ask a property manager. it will I think it dwells on things that are kind of trivial, like, "Are you licensed with the National Department of or National Institute of Property Management?" But there are some really phenomenal questions about early termination fees if you're not satisfied with the service, specifics about not only how are they gonna screen tenants, but how are they gonna hold your funds, right? A huge part of property management is holding people's security deposits or maintenance, reserves. Make sure that those are separated, and there are systems to do that. Um, uh, w how long have they been in business and what is their tenure? What are their records? I encourage everyone to check out that Bigger Pockets resource about how to screen a property manager. It's great.
Nice, nice. No, that's super helpful. I think these might be like questions that we could easily overlook, or maybe some people will just spend too much time getting into questions that don't really like move the needle, so to speak, as far as like you figuring out whether or not this company is good for you. You know, asking about licensing. Not that it's not important, but it doesn't tell you the full story. And then also maybe additional fees and stuff like that, right? Like, hey, what are your fees? And then, are there additional fees for, for different services, or if there are different scenarios that arise. I am curious, what is like the craziest thing you've seen or heard, like on a maybe on a rental
Yeah.
application or just in general?
So, I'll give you an example. I mean, in New York, and in I think just about every state, you are allowed to pay your rent in whatever legal tender you have. So it can be cash, it can be cashier's check, money order.
Oh boy.
Yeah, digital. And so, yeah, I mean, it is wild. I've heard of people paying rent in cash, but with bad bills. And I'm like,
Oh wow.
how did you think that was going to go? We know where you live.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it really comes down to uh, knowing your rights, being educated and really staying aware, right?
In that scenario, what happened? So they paid with the bad bills. At what point was it discovered immediately, or was that when
No.
the bills are being deposited?
When the bills were being deposited, they kept getting rejected. They ended up taking them in, and the teller explained that these were bad, and then they were able to basically file a police report, not just a police report, but counterfeiting is a federal crime. So
Yeah.
you take it to the FBI.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh, was this like I mean, I'm assuming this particular instance was that landlord's first experience, but when they found out, like, was this like a pattern with that person, or?
No, I think and again, there was some plausible deniability about where the bills had come from. I don't think that that landlord was housing a major counterfeiting operation, but it just gives you an example of something that came out of left field, right? You just never would expect that.
Yeah. Would you say that with experiences like that, and the fact that no 2 days seem to be the same in New York real estate, has this like become like a passion for you? Or has this always been a passion for you as far as like investing and management?
I mean, I think it's always been a passion for me. I love the kind of people who will look at an investment like real estate. I love people who take the opportunity to provide housing for the community seriously. I think that's really honorable. And I just, I think the more I experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the more I'm able to support people who are interested in making this kind of investment.
Yeah, for sure. And it is, like we talked about before, it's always such an important like public discussion. Housing, what's happening with housing? Are we going to see, new development, or what can we see to make it easier for, landlords to provide a suitable living experience for their tenants, things like that. So, I really appreciate your insights. I just have two more questions. Just one piece of advice that you would give to tenants, and any piece of advice that you would give to landlords.
I would say there is a website called nyccourts.gov. And I would look up your name in that system, and see if there are any lawsuits, or criminal charges, that come up. It might be somebody with your same name. I've even seen it, for instance, somebody was exposed to lead paint as a child, and so they were named as a plaintiff in a lawsuit against, a public service agency, and it is not legal for landlords to completely discriminate based on just one appearance in the court records, but
Mm,
many landlords will do it.
mm.
And so I encourage you to look up your name, get educated. If there is some crazy person with your same name who has a criminal record a mile long, uh, be prepared to explain that to people. If you were named as a plaintiff when you were a baby, be prepared. Just know what information is available to landlords. Um, Especially if you are relying on housing vouchers or Section 8, there is fierce competition, for housing, that takes those, particular means of income, like it or not. I mean, this is just the reality of it, and I believe in those programs, and so I want people who participate in them to have, a fighting chance of getting safe and affordable housing. Um, so that's one, and then for landlords, it is not glamorous, and they will hear it all over the place, but maintain a reserve of 6 to 9 months. Um, it's never what people wanna hear. I think as investors, we're always looking at the next thing, we're always trying to get fancy with our capital, but it will give you peace of mind, and it will prevent you from, I think, much greater opportunity cost down the road.
That makes sense, and something will always happen. Like no matter what,
Yes.
can be a brand new construction building. It's inevitable that something's going to happen. Maintenance, water, we talked about, right? Like things that are completely outside of our control. We can have, quarterly inspections and do everything we possibly can to be proactive, but there are things that are completely outside of our control that can happen. And that can, that can spiral into a bigger issue if there aren't any reserves.
Yes.
But I guess I know I said I had just one question, but now just your response made me think of one more thing. Um, with landlords, with investors, I think what everybody wants is like to have the ideal tenant, right? Investors, they want the best deal, right?
Yes.
Once they get the best deal and it's a rental property, they want the best tenant. Is there anything that you see that separates one unit from another when it comes to just attracting the best tenants, or is it like an amenity? Is it um, some kind of system that the landlord has in place? Is there anything that you can think of that could separate one landlord's unit from another?
That is great. I mean, I really think good management makes a huge difference. I think, people behave differently when there is somebody doing quarterly inspections, when there is somebody checking in once a month about anything broken or damaged. Um, when they know that the landlord and the manager care about a property, they will care about a property, and I'm not speaking universally by any stretch of the imagination, but absolutely it changes people's behavior. And I think, again, those quarterly inspections are huge. People are not going to, we joke about this, but people are not going to run a visible criminal enterprise in your home if they know that they're gonna have to show you the unit, even on through a camera once a quarter, right?
Oh boy. Yeah. Wow, those are such great points. And to that point, when somebody knows that the property is being managed and maintained proactively, it kind of you mentioned this earlier, but it kind of like increases the likelihood that they will manage this thing as if they owned it, or they will
Yes.
maintain their unit as if they owned it.
Yes.
Yeah, a good friend of mine has a property maintenance company in Brooklyn, and he basically what he does is he started off just maintaining common spaces, making sure the front and trash pickup was like seamless, and just kind of preparing the
John.
unit. Yeah, yeah, John. Shout out to John Rosario.
John
Yeah,
Rosario, and a legend.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Pristine property maintenance. But one thing like I've spoken to John about is, once you start to handle Amazon packages in a certain way and have a system for that intake, right? Once you start to manage trash pickup a certain way and maintain common spaces, little by little, it starts to expose the people who aren't living in that building with the same standard, right?
Yes.
And it quickly allows like maintenance and management companies, let's say, to identify like what needs to be done to get this to become a top tier building. So it's awesome that you've shared these gems. I'm super grateful for that. Is there any last minute thing that maybe we didn't get to talk about that you wanted to mention?
No, I think I'm complete. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Lydia, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome, and we'll put how to get in contact with your company in our description and our notes. And looking forward to a future
Thank
conversation.
you so much, Abel.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.